So it looks like we're not going to be getting a Switch Pro in 2020. But what does that mean to us as Splatoon fans? So if you haven't heard the rumors already, there was talks going around saying that Nintendo was working on a successor to the Switch with better internals, a better CPU, maybe better battery life, and maybe a better chassis, like a metal enclosure, instead of that plastic bending, breaking stuff that they have right now. And that it was supposed to be released sometime around March or spring, summer 2020. But Nintendo's now gone officially on the record during their fiscal report to say, please note that we have no plans to launch a new Nintendo Switch model during 2020. But it's not completely out of the equation that they wouldn't be making a Pro model after 2020. It's just we're not going to be seeing that this year. We might see some decal changes or something like that, like the Animal Crossing version. But the reason why I say it's not completely hard to believe that they would make a new version is because Nintendo has gone on the record to say that they want to extend the lifetime of the Switch given its success. It's now sold 52 million units, beating the NES's lifetime sales. Although it's coming up to its 4-year life cycle, which we would typically see for a console, given the fact that the handheld department and the home console department had fused together, it would be safe to assume that they could possibly do what they did with the 3DS and make a new Switch or a Switch XL, but at least we can safely say it wouldn't be coming out this year. But why would this matter to us as Splatoon fans? We see the common public opinion that it's too soon to be even thinking about further Splatoon content. It hasn't even been an anniversary since the last Splatfest in Splatoon 2. Now, Splatoon 1 to Splatoon 2 took 2 years, and Splatoon 2 has now been going on for plus 3 years. So in that sense, it would look like we're up for a sequel. But the Wii U, given the fact that it was poorly marketed and it didn't do so well, it would make sense that they worked on it very quickly. Also, given the fact that Nogami and their team had already started working on Splatoon 2 the moment that Splatoon 1 was finished, but this time around, they ended up working on Animal Crossing instead. But I'd like to share my thoughts on why I think us looking at if there's a Switch Pro version or a better hardware version of the Switch could really help us try to predict what Nogami and their team are thinking in terms of how they're spending their development time and try to figure out when eventually we get more to the Splatoon series. Will it be in the form of DLC for the current game, or would we get a brand new game entirely? Now, I mentioned this in a previous video, but just to recap my thoughts, I don't think it makes sense to make a brand new Splatoon 3 on the same current hardware of the Switch. We assume that the Splatoon 2 is utilizing the hardware as best it can. So for them to make a brand new Splatoon 3 and divide the community, unless both players from both games could play together, which I assume they wouldn't be able to, given that there would be different specials, different weapons, different stages, different characters, who knows? I don't think they'd be able to mingle. You'd be dividing the community unnecessarily because the hardware wouldn't be improved, so the graphic intensity of the game would not be improved. It would make sense, however, if there was a new console. If there was a new Switch or a Switch Pro or just better internals, they could then develop a better version of Splatoon and then make a new game. And then that would definitely make sense to potentially split a community because it's a better game. However, if there is no Switch Pro, perhaps it would make more sense to just do DLC, just as a bumper content to give something to the Splatoon series until they can develop Splatoon 3. So given what we know, I want to present you with some hypotheticals. We know that we're not going to be getting new hardware for the Switch this year, but let's say that they're working on it and they plan to release it mid or sometime next year. I would assume that Nogami and their team would have the prototype or at least know the hardware that they're going to be working with on this new console. Splatoon, although it only sold, I think it was 9 million units, as opposed to Smash's like 12 million or something. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Or Mario Kart with their like 20-something million. It's still nothing to laugh at. Splatoon's still very early in its stages as a new IP. It's still exploding, and it's definitely a hardware seller. I would definitely, and I think anyone watching this would buy a new Switch so that they could play Splatoon 3. I think if Nogami and their team had access to a prototype to new hardware coming out in the next year or two, they would spend their development efforts in the Splatoon series on a sequel to help not only push the sales of the hardware, but also so that they can make a better product instead of just DLC and selling it at $20, what have you, like they did the Octo expansion, as successful as it was. But let's look at a different hypothetical. What if the Switch Pro is not a thing, or it's not going to be anything in the next year or two? Would Nogami really spend all this time working on a Splatoon 3, or would they just work on DLC? I then jump back to my original opinion. I don't think they would make Splatoon 3 on the same hardware. I think this is more of up to debate, and you can let me know in the comments below, but I don't really see the point in dividing community. I would much rather than put out DLC and already extend on this beautiful game that is Splatoon 2, running at full 1080p 60 frames a second. It's utilizing the hardware as best it can. And it's still early in the year, so that's why I would think that DLC could possibly, at earliest, take a year to be developed, and we can maybe see it this holiday or early next year. Nowhere close to releasing Splatoon 3 content. There's still the possibility that they could reuse assets from Splatoon 2 and make a Splatoon 3, just like how we assume they're doing with Breath of the Wild 2 using the same assets. However, my opinion is it's a very different situation. Splatoon is an online-based game, and it's community-based. You need to be able to play with people. So dividing the community is a very real matter that they need to look at. Whereas Breath of the Wild, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about connecting with other people playing the original Breath of the Wild, and you're playing Breath of the Wild 2. It doesn't matter. The only last hypothetical I could think of would be that Nintendo will be making a pro or a better hardware version, but they don't have a prototype available already. If I was Nogami and their team, I wouldn't be able to develop Splatoon 3 knowing that there's going to be better hardware coming out later that I just don't have access to right now. So then I would focus my efforts on DLC, have it come out holiday this year, or maybe early next year, and then when I do have access to this prototype, then start development of Splatoon 3. Now, aside from the debate of whether we're going to be getting DLC for Splatoon 2 next, or if we're just getting a fully fledged brand new game, be it Splatoon 3, I think an even larger debate that people are having is, where is the story going? What are we seeing next in the world of Splatoon? We're naturally assuming it's going to be building off the final Splatfest, where Team Chaos had won, and that had a bit of a Salmonid, Primal, maybe building off the lore of Mr. Grizz, and just knowing more about what's happening behind the scenes at Grizzco. Whereas if Order had won, we would have seen more about the sanitized Octolings, and more with Tartar. Just like they did with Splatoon 1, the final Splatfest, Callie ended up being the loser, so she went to be into a little bit of a darker side, a little bit of the antagonist in Splatoon 2, even if it was just lightly hinted. But I think there was less details in that. It was just Callie versus Marie. Marie could have easily been swapped with Callie, and the story still would have made sense. Whereas in this case, it's Salmonids versus Sanitized Octolings, or Tartar versus DJ Octavio. There's such a contrasting difference here that I think if they were planning the story for either one, it'd be such a shame knowing that Chaos wins. We find out more about Mr. Grizz, Grizzco, and all that kind of stuff, but we never find out more about Tartar or about the Sanitized Octolings and who was behind that. But to that, I theorized this idea. Perhaps we could be getting both sides of the story. Maybe because Chaos had won, Splatoon 3's story will be surrounding Salmonids, Mr. Grizz, Grizzco, and the backstory of what's happening there. But then we could end up getting DLC eventually in the future, talking about Order side of things with Tartar and the Sanitized Octolings, and maybe we'll see some more tests failed. I don't know. But that's what I know, and those are my thoughts. You guys let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think it's way too early to even be thinking about Splatoon's sequel? Perhaps you think a better Switch will not even happen, nor does it really even relate to us as Splatoon fans? Or maybe you have an interesting take on how you think the story will develop in Splatoon 3, or whatever successor we see to Splatoon series. Let me know. Have a good day. Bye-bye.